I'm born in Helsinki, and I went to school, Normal Lyceum, which was very classical training. So it meant every day Latin, so 5 hours per week, Latin, and then Greece, during 8 years through the whole Lyceum, and then 3 years Greek language. So, and I think this is the basis for me when I came to the Roman language area, let's say France, Italy, and Portugal, and Brazil, to have this basis. But that's very important still, I think. But then I was interested in those Lyceum years in issues. I was pianist, and I played piano, and I entered then Sibelius Academy when I had got baccalaureate, and in the same year I entered University of Helsinki. So I'm pianist, and in sciences I was interested in theoretical philosophy at that time. So, and philosophy for me was the German philosophy, so nothing else. So I was quite fascinated, and then I noticed that I had to translate into my own mother tongue some texts in German. Otherwise, I will never understand exactly what they are. And the same method has been through my life when I left for later Paris. I translated from French, let's say, Greimas and others, into Finnish. So Finnish language is certainly, I think, rather difficult for anyone who is not in the Finno-Ugrian field. But only so I thought I could adapt and assume this knowledge as my own mental properties, so to say. And so I started to read, translate Hegel, his Wissenschaft der Logik, which certainly you know, and I translated, and I still have as a relic in my library, this handwritten, it's all handwritten. There were no computers. The year was 69, 70, 71, you know, no computers, all handwritten like that. So it's funny. So with my own notes always, I left in the margin place for my notes. And from these notes then gradually grew my own theories on the basis of what Hegel has said. And I would say that this Hegel study was important in musicology in general, because if you are in German musicology, either historical or systematic, you don't understand them without first studying Hegel, like Theodor Adorno, for instance. Adorno, who is fascinating man, he's a genius, of course, but it's all based on Hegel, and even Karl Dahlhaus, very much in Hegel, so I recommend Hegel in that sense very strongly. But I also had other studies. I then interested in Martin Heidegger and his Sein und Zeit, this book, and I started to translate that as well into Finnish. So Sein und Zeit by Heidegger. But and then I also studied Rudolf Carnap, Der logische Aufbau der Welt, which came from a totally other school, you know, for this Vienna circle, which was never interested in semiotics, which later became for me important because, you know, in those years, 1920s and 10s, they met in Vienna, Neurath, Frege, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and semiotics was for them, it was altväterisch, something very old-fashioned and not interesting. Semantics, that's something they accepted, but not semiotics. So, but this had serious consequences later, because this Anglo-analytic philosophy has never been accepting semiotics, to my mind, in spite of Charles Sanders Peirce, who was, of course, the great philosopher in the States, I would say so. Anyway, I translated these German scholars quite a young student, still at school and then in the university, but no one in Finland was interested in such issues. No one, because all our philosophy was Anglo-analytic. And you may know we have in that field some rather great names like Jaakko Hintikka and Jori Henrik von Wright, especially von Wright, who was a follower of Wittgenstein in the chair of Cambridge. So he was Wittgenstein's pupil, and then he got all the manuscripts of Wittgenstein for editing. I brought them to Helsinki, in this town, and they were kept at Vironkatu, the street of Viro, on the other side of my later Department of Musicology. So I never knew that Wittgenstein was so close. But anyway, that was analytic, and so I was rather upset when I entered university, and the first course on formal logics and those atomic counting of the atom phrases and their extremely formalized issue, which I seriously studied also, I must say. Now, at the same time, I was in music studies, and then came this period in almost every young man's life in Finland. I had to go to the army for the service for 1 year, and in the army, I got a kind of social awakening by meeting people from totally different social classes, etc., and got interested then in anthropology and sociology. That was the year was 68. You remember what happened in 68? It was a rather radical year in the whole Europe, where all the young people were in a certain movement, which was later revealed rather big mistake, but anyway, that was everywhere. And so I went to sociology and anthropology, and then I read one tiny book which changed very much my route, namely, it was Myth of Asdival by Claude Levi-Strauss, a French anthropologist. It was a Swedish translation. I didn't master French at all. So, and in fact, all the semiotics came to Finland first via Swedish translations. You know, we are bilingual, Finnish and Swedish, so we can Swedish. And so, if you put, thanks, Magosata. So here is the man I'm talking, this Claude Levi-Strauss. And somehow, by his structuralism, I learned how to combine these two issues, namely music and philosophy. Music as something kind of bricolage or something le sensible, and then music, then philosophy, which was abstract, l'intelligible. So I saw in his method a great promise indeed, and was totally fascinated, and bought his Mythologique, this 4-volume study on the Brazilian Indian mythology, which had much of musical inspiration, as you know. So that, as you know, many chapters are in fact by musical terms like La Sonate de bonne manière or L'astronomie bien tempérée, etc. And it closes with study of Ravel Bolero, his rather interesting analysis of that. So can you put the next page? Then happens so that I wanted to go to Paris, of course. So I was then MA master, and I had written a master thesis, an introduction to a structuralist musicology in Finnish. But I wanted to study with Amit Levi-Strauss, my great idol of those years. So I left for Paris. That was 70 and 71. And well, I left for Collège de France because he was academician, one of those immortals, as you say. And I left for Collège de France, and then knocked the door, and there was his secretary, and I told that whom I am, and I want to see Mr. Levi-Strauss. Well, to my surprise, it was easy. In 1 week, they made an appointment. And I was much helped by our common friend, who was a Finnish-Canadian anthropologist, Elli-Kaija Köngäs Maranda. Her husband was Pierre Maranda, who was rather famous Canadian anthropologist. And so Elli-Kaija was friend of Levi-Strauss. I could bring greetings from her. So that helps in France. Always you have some contact. And so I met Levi-Strauss, and that was wonderful. And I always remember what he said at the end. It was an interview, namely that when I said that I think that structuralism of such a place like Finland or Helsinki can only be a reflection of such a great center like Paris. Then he said, "Non, monsieur, vous avez trompé. The centre est toujours là où vous êtes vous-même." No, mister, you have mistaken. Center is always where you are yourself. And that's something which is very good to remember in the life. And somehow later, when I published that book, Myth and Music, and he got it, and he sent me this message. Can you put the next one, Maguzada? It's the end of the next. Oh yes, in which he said that he had got my book and he will have a pleasure to read it, and that unfortunately himself he was unable to make music to compose, but he felt it very important that someone is studying just music with his methods. What is funny in this message is that he twice called me a young boy from Finland in 20s as cher colleague. Cher colleague twice. It's rather amusing fact here. Can you put the next my PowerPoint? Yes, no, I studied at the same time piano in Paris. I was at Ecole Normale de Musique with my wife Eila, who was he's also a pianist, and I was with Jules Gentil first at Ecole, and then I was with this gentleman who is Jacques Février. Jacques Février, who was very famous pianist. I didn't know exactly at the time how terribly famous he was, but how he had performed Ravel piano concerto at Salon British Polignac in 1920s, and so. But then he lived at the Rio de Janeiro in Paris, close to Boulevard Malesherbes, and we took private lessons with him about French music. And anyway, that was the other line of my life is musicianship. And I must say that it's very important that you are a musician if you want to become a musicologist, because I don't see it's possible to speak about music without some kind of quite concrete and practical knowledge of music as a musician. So I continue still, and now I play chamber music with my students very much. Anyway, now can you put to the next? It should be, I think, yes. So now this was my doctoral thesis: is Myth and Music, which was very Levi-Straussian. So and that was my first period of my scholarly life. I would call it was very much under Levi-Strauss's influence. As you know, he had his theory of myth and music, how they were interlinked. Can you put the next slide? I think it should be. No, that is about Kullervo. I studied in this book, namely 3 musical works which were inspired by myths, and they were Richard Wagner, Siegfried, Kullervo by Jean Sibelius, his first symphony, as you know, huge piece with choir and solist, and then L'Oedipe Roi, Oedipus Rex, the Stravinsky. So that is the painting by Axel Gallen-Kalla of Kullervo. Can you put the next one? Because it should be the. It's only okay. It's 2-2. But anyway, if you get back to Levi-Strauss, yes. So he had the idea that myth and music were both stemming from language. Of course, because structuralism was inspired by Fernand de Saussure. Saussure was the origin of European semiotics, definitely. Saussure, you know, his Cours de linguistique générale, 1916, made by notes from his lectures by his pupils, and it was a kind of prophecy of the whole future of semiotics. Anyway, the idea that there are signs which have the signifier, these 2 aspects, was also in Levi-Strauss's mind when he thought that there are 4 fields of human mind. There are language, myth, music, and mathematics, the 4th one. So language had both le son et le sens, as it's put it, the sound and sense. Well, it is the signified, whereas myth adopted only the sense, the sense, the signified, and operated with it. So if you have a mythical story, let's say by Oedipus or Kullervo, you can tell it in many languages. You change language, but the story is the same. So the story is not dependent on the concrete sound aspect of by which science you are telling it. Whereas music was contrary. It operated only with sound, the song, and omitted the sense. So, la musique, c'est le langage moins le sens. La musique, c'est le langage moins le sens. Music is a language without sense. But because it is stemming from language, we have the irresistible need to bring there our own meanings and associations when we go to concerts. Even when we hear so-called absolute music, let's say symphony by Beethoven or Sibelius or piece by Chopin, we put there our own meanings, le signifié somehow, if we complete it. And then the fourth field is mathematics, which has neither sound nor sense. Well, I'm not a mathematician, although I just published my most recent essay is in the Danesi handbook of cognitive studies and mathematics, which is very funny because I know nothing about cognitive studies, and at school my teacher mathematics told I'm a critical case in mathematics. Anyway, the mathematics was the fourth field in Levi-Strauss' idea, and his impact was very great. But then in Paris, in fact, I met this other gentleman whose picture you see here. His name is Algirdas Julian Greimas, who was a Lithuanian-born linguist who had emigrated during the Second World War, who had studied at Kaunas University. And what's interesting for us here in Finland, that one of his teachers was the greatest Lithuanian philosopher, Wilhelm Seesemann, who was half Finn, of Parlan family. I have seen the study book of Greimas, and there is a note about the lectures of logics signed by Seesemann. So that's interesting because then later in Finnish semiotics, that's one line stemming from this source. Anyway, I met Greimas in Paris. There was at that time a reception for foreign scholars at Boulevard Saint-Germain. I went there, and they arranged me meetings with great scholars like Greimas, Roland Barthes, Tsvetan Todorov. So this picture is later in Helsinki already. That's 1979 when I invited Greimas to Helsinki to lecture. It was first time he came to Finland, I think, altogether. He came the second time later, 1983, for the second Congress on musical semiotics. I arranged it at Jyväskylä University in the middle of Finland. He came there, and that was quite memorable. But anyway, Greimas became my supervisor of my doctoral thesis on myth and music. And I first planned to write that in French and for him at Ecole des Hautes Etudes en Sciences Sociales. But then, however, I decided to do that for the University of Helsinki because there was some important chairs opened in Finland, and I thought it might be better for my career have a PhD from Finland than from France. And then my French was not so good, but Greimas promised to correct my language altogether. But anyway, it went like that. But then I came, and that is already the second phase of my career, namely my Paris school phase of Greimas. I don't know how well you know in Poland this Greimas school, because I think he created one of the most systematic and rigorous schools in semiotics altogether. No, during these Paris years, in which I attended his seminars, I again translated into Finnish his Semiotic Structurale from 1967. Semiotic Structurale, you know, was first significant work by Greimas, who had, after Lithuania, came via Ankara, Turkey, and Alexandria universities, where he stayed with Roland Barthes. He came by that route to France, to southern France, and then to Paris, where he became the directeur d'études. But so, by the way, I also met Roland Barthes sometimes in Paris, and I made his interview and planned to go to his seminar. But Barthes was very elegant gentleman. He had very, very nice hands. He was a pianist. I never heard him to play anything, but I knew he could play. And but then I was already in Greimas, and so similar. So and they were not good terms with each other. So then Bart was excluded altogether. But I remember him very well from these years. Now then, anyway, my Levi-Strauss ideas continued, and I wanted to study the Indians and make anthropological work. And so I decided I have to go to Brazil to continue what Levi-Strauss had done there and go to his steps to the Indians. And so it became possible via grants of Rotary Foundation, Rotary International. So Rotary grants could be applied for in any country which had Rotary clubs like Finland. And so I applied it, and I got it for doctoral studies at Rio de Janeiro, Universidade Federal de Rio de Janeiro. And that was the year 1976, which I spent with my life, all the year in Rio, or rather in Petropolis, which is a closing emperor town on the mountains. Because Rio is tropical, too hot for us Nordic people. So that's the reason. And my plan was, of course, to go to Indians, to River Xingu, which was the reservoir of Indians, and study the Suya Indians. Because I met in Rio an American ethnomusicologist, Anthony Seeger, whom you may know. He was from the very famous Seeger music family, so that his grandfather had been, I would say, the founder of American musicology, namely Charles Seeger. You may know this scholar whose wife was famous woman composer Ruth Crawford Seeger. And by the way, Charles Seeger wrote very early some essays about musical semiotics, which were reprinted in his collected some of his collections, and so he was very much. One is on the moods of music logic. Fascinating, but I don't think they had any impact in the United States in those years yet. Anyway, so I was in Rio. I planned because Tony Seeger had been with Suya Indians, lived there 2 years, and he had recorded much of the music and advised me that I should study their flute orchestras and go to Mato Grosso, which was possible by the FUNAI permission. FUNAI is Fundação Nacional do Índio, and by the airplane of Brazilian Army. But after all, I never got the permission to go there because they wrote me at the end that there is an influenza epidemic raging, that I could not go there. So, but I don't know what was the real reason. So, but instead I stayed in Rio, and there I decided, encouraged by my teacher in Helsinki, Professor Eero Tarasti, who was our Sibelius scholar, to study Heitor Villa-Lobos, who was the great composer of Brazil, and I would say the greatest composer of the whole Western Hemisphere. I think he's even greater than Charles Ives and all these others. So he was a Brazilian Sibelius. He lived in 1887 and then 1959. And so I met his wife, his widow, Arminda, in Palazzo de Cultura in downtown Rio de Janeiro. I studied there with the scores of this enormous composer. And then this book on Villa-Lobos appeared much later, first in Finnish, 1984, and then in American, in North Carolina by McFarland Press in 1995, I think. And now, finally, a year ago, in Portuguese translation in Sao Paulo, I have it here. I'll show you this book. It is my Villa-Lobos life and work, like this. So it's rather big one. I'm very proud of this, and so because that is maybe the first analytic study of his enormous output. It has, no one knows how big it is, maybe 2,000 works. I don't know if in Poland you know Villa-Lobos at all, except if you are a guitarist when you play, of course. Bahias, Brasilias, and Chores. And so I think he's a genial composer whom I did not understand first at all. I remember in Paris, I heard his concert, Évocation pour Villa-Lobos. It's a diplomatic occasion at Honorary President Wilson, and Anastella Schick played and danced the Indio Branco. That's a white Indian. I was laughing. It was so funny to me, to my mind. But then later I started to understand him, and Olivier Messiaen said that he was the greatest orchestrator of the 20th century music. Anyway, let us leave Brazil. I got back to Europe, and then I defended my thesis, Myth and Music. My opponent was Jean-Jacques Nattier, whom you may know, who was a French musicologist who had settled in Canada, in Montreal, and he was my opponent. He came opponent, so. And so that was published at Mouton de Gruyter, because 1979, the semiotic movement was strong. We had the Second World Congress of Semiotics at Vienna, which remained as the biggest one so far in the history of semiotics. I think 2,000 people gathered, opened by Chancellor Rudolf Kirchschläger at Vienna University, and very big event. And there I met an American semiotician who became very important, namely Thomas A. Sibioc. I'm sorry, I don't have here his photo, I have it, but Thomas A. Sibioc was at Indiana University, Bloomington. I met him first in Budapest in a pre-congress by Vilmos Voigt, and I met this gentleman. Physically, if I portray, he was combination of Emperor Franz Joseph II, Sigmund Freud, and Ernst Hemingway. So you can imagine this person. And he was Hungarian originally, but immigrated before the war and become very American. But the important what he was, he studied Finno-Ugrian languages, Cheremis, Hanti, Mansi, Vogul, etc., and made fieldwork at Volga River in early 50s as an American. And he was namely the organizer of semiotic movement altogether. He founded the Semiotica magazine, which still exists, and this approach to semiotics at Bloomington and important. So he became my great mentor and my friend also. He came almost annually to Finland in late years, and I was much in Bloomington also. Bloomington, the wonderful place for music, as you know, the School of Music there. But that is about these practical issues. But then let's go to theory. Maybe you are already tired to hear these adventures. My first study in musical semiotics really in I would say systematic sense. Of course, my myth and music was already very Levi-Straussian, and I used some Greimassian terms like the seam analysis and the idea of the isotopies, isotopy, which was one innovation of Greimassian semiotics. By the way, the term isotopy, I heard from my colleague Andrew Chesterman, who's a British, that it's wrong. You should say isotopicity, the quality of having the isotopes in some meaning, because it meant just the level of meaning which makes an otherwise fragmentary text coherent, that you read it as coherent text. You remember the Greimas study of Maupassant short story Deux Amis, which short story nearly takes place in 1871 in Paris, where the Prussian army is around it, and two friends go to fish. And the story opens with a very short phrases. Paris was locked. There was nothing to be eaten. There were many rats on the streets. There were sparrows on the roofs. But you don't read it like that, but you read it as one whole, as Paris. Paris is the isotopy which is binding together. And in music, it happens very often that in music you have very fragmentary musical phrases, but there is behind an isotopy which binds them together. Now I should play at piano or something, but my piano is the dining room. I can't go there now with the zooming. So that's one concept I used already from Greimas in my myth and music isotopy. Then I studied the mythical isotopies, like the legendary, nature mythical, sacred, hero mythical. And I distinguished about 17 mythical themes, sem. And if I took any concrete piece which sounded like mythical work, they were a combination of these different themes in different quantities and amounts. So that that was a same analysis already in music. So in music, myth, there were myth, fairy tale, saga, all these categories, which I got rather from André Jolles, a German scholar, in the book Die Einfachen Formen, and of course Karl Jaspers, Die Philosophie der symbolischen Formen, book number 2, Das mythische Denken, which later had impact on Yuri Lotman and his theory of myth and so on. Anyway, but then my first book with the really Paris school method was this. Oh, here I don't have it on screen, but it's below this. A Theory of Musical Semiotics, which was published by Indiana University, and it was application of Greimas method to music. Can you, Marcus, put some of my next diagrams, next PowerPoint? Now that is still a Levi-Strauss scheme of, you see, music, mythology, language, and so. Could you please put next one? Ah, no, all right. This is already something rather cryptic, I guess, because this study, A Theory of Musical Semiotics, had first a theoretical part in which I explained what is my theory based on Greimas. And Greimas method adopted in its form of so-called generative course, parcours génératif. You know, these generative models were fashionable in 1980s. And so also Greimas put all his important semiotic notions into what he called parcours génératif. Of course, Noam Chomsky was behind. Noam Chomsky, who wrote about generative grammars, and he was applied by Leonard Bernstein to music by his unanswered question. So yeah. But anyway, Greimas had his rather complicated. By the way, can you show the next one? Perhaps I had that parcours here. Can you put the next part? Yes, oh, here it is. Okay. That is the Greimasian famous parcours génératif. You see, there is syntactic composant part and semantic. They are parallel going. And so they are up are the deep structures. They are up. Well, that's rather illogical. They should be down, of course, but they are up here. So, and you see that there's syntaxe fondamentale, the fundamental syntax, niveau profond, the profound level, and then niveau, the surface. And you have also fundamental semantics and then narrative semantics. So these syntax and semantics side by side. And then you enter the structure discursive, discursive structures, you see, and there are these, as the syntactical categories, you have this actoriality, temporality, and spatiality. So actors, time, and space for 3 categories, which, of course, are coming from Immanuel Kant. You know, Kant, Kritik der reinen Vernunft. Das Ding an sich, we never know. It appears to our senses via 3 categories of subject, time, and space. Then Kant was adopted by Ernst Cassirer. He was a neo-Kantian. And Cassirer influenced structuralism, Susanne Langer, United States, in music aesthetics and so. So the only difference is that Greimas calls subject as actors or actant, acteur or actant, which are the protagonists of a mythical story or any story in any narrative structure. They are actors. So, and then on the semantic side, you have the thematization and figurativization. I mean that you provide this syntactic structure with certain thematic context. You may, as Greimas said, investissement sémantique, the semantic investment. And on the level of figurativization, you have the service of text. It's a figurative already. So I applied this to music and made my own musical model, freely adapting this Greimas scheme. In fact, I took only some levels of it because at the end this is very complicated. I took only the level of isotopy, the deep level, and then came the categories: actoriality, temporality, and spatiality in music, and then modalities, which is not here, but which entered Greimas theory later, and in fact, which remain his most important contribution to semiotics together with modalities. I don't know if you know if you are a linguist, but you speak in language modalities, and then they mean the manners a speaker animates his or her speech with, his wishes, hopes, fears, certainties, uncertainties, beliefs. These are modalities. Let's say in French, you want to say, I have to go to a bank. Il faut que. Now, you don't say je vais à la banque, but you say il faut que j'aille à la banque. So you put the verb in a special subjunctive verb form, which you know must learn by heart. For us Finns, it's terribly difficult because we don't have these modalities in Finnish language at all. Sorry. Or you want to say, I hope she comes. J'espère qu'elle vienne. You put the very venir, vient, not le vient, elle vient, but elle vienne. So that is modality in language. And this happens in any sign language, also in music. And via modalities, musical structure is, so to say, modalized and provided with human contents, and it becomes something has some semantic aspect without any, let's say, poetic program, like in such music like Beethoven Pastoral Symphony or Wagner Waldweben on Siegfried or Sibelius Tapiola or whatsoever or Chopin, if you think Adam Mickiewicz and if you think his ballets are that's not true, but if you think so. So I mean that that's very important. And when Greimas came to Finland to the second Congress I mentioned in Jyväskylä 1983, the title of his lecture was Vers la troisième révolution sémiotique, towards the third semiotic revolution, and it was just the invention of the modalities. First evolution had been invention of semantics by Michel Bereal. Second evolution was by Saussure, and third one was by modalities. And now on this level, amazingly, he came close to the Anglo-analytic philosophy of so-called deontic logic and logic of modalities, which was very developed branch of that, and in which this Johann Henrik von Wright was very, very important figure, and so these two scholars had some common points. So I remember when I entered in Paris Greimas seminar, Greimas introduced to me this huge 200-person seminar that was signé Monsieur Tarasti, le compatriote de Monsieur von Wright from the Helsinki. So they understood who it was. Okay. Now let's go back to the previous PowerPoint. So my book, A Theory of Musical Semiotics, had first the theoretical part, and then major part were applications, so concrete analysis of different musical pieces, which I by purpose chose for different style periods, like Beethoven Waldstein, Chopin two pieces, namely Polonaise Fantasy and Ballet G minor, Franz Liszt Ballet Dobermann, Mussorgsky Pictures, Sibelius' Fourth Symphony, and then, yeah, Debussy, Eero Tarasti, the Zodians, one prelude, and then at the end, minimalism at the end. So I chose the pieces from different styles to show that my method was universal and not just bound with one classical romantic style, but very, so that's something we think in musical semiotics, that our method is universal. And it's not only of classical romantic style within our music, but also avant-garde music and also other cultures, not only European, but also non-European cultures. It should be valid there. And I'm glad to say there have been already studies using this method over there. So what you see now on the screen, this rather formalized scheme, this is the modal grammar of Chopin G minor ballade. I presented this study in the Chopin Congress, in this big Congress in Warsaw. It was a centenary Congress indeed. I'm glad that Professor Tomaszewski seemed to accept, because he mentioned this in his studies. My first study was this Polonaise Fantaisie, which I wrote for Colloque de Cerisy in Normandy, which was a colloque on Greimas and Paul Ricoeur in Paris. It was my first narratological study of music. So we are studying here the narratology, narratology, in which my colleague in Paris, Strasbourg, Marta Graboc, is a specialist. Anyway, let's see what is there. You see there are terms being and doing, and not doing, not being. So for the first idea of that X is famous, the semiotic square by Greimas, based on the idea of linguistics, namely S1, S2, non-S2, S1. Like in phonetics, you have the distinctive features. But here I put there some modalities like being, doing, not being. And these operations correspond to the story by what happens between subject and object. In a story, we have a subject, let's say, let's say Nibelungen Ring. Siegfried, subject, object may be Brynhilde. He tries to, or let's say prince and princess. Prince wants to get the princess. So subject wants to get conjuncted with object. Or let's say Wotan wants to get the ring and gold S and 1. Then he has to do if he's disjuncted, he has to do something, namely doing, you see, to be disjuncted. He disjuncted, he must get conjuncted. So he must be in going to be conjuncted, you see, S, not doing O. And again, if you are in the state of not being, without possession, not possession of the, let's say, like the Rhine daughters, they are deprived of the gold, they must get back it. So you see, all the stories are based on these very simple operations between the two moralizations. And now, the formal scheme you see with the PN on the left side, they are program narrative. So I segment Chopin ballad into 13 narrative programs, you see? And then I analyze every program. F is the function. They are combination of different modalities which are modalizing the main phrase, which are in brackets, let's say, subject, object, subject, non-object. And then there's T, transformation. It can be plus or minus. And then we go to the next program. And you still see then that we have the modalities we have here are W is will, K means no, C means can, and M means it's just modality, and A and A is appear and B is to be. So, of course, M is must. Sorry. So we have will, know, can, must. Vouloir, savoir, pouvoir, devoir, which are the basic modalities. And of each modality, I counted that each Chopin phrase, it can exist in 5 quantities, namely plus, 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 0, minus, minus, minus. So it can be very much, little, plus, 0, or then it can be negatively minus, or then minus, minus, it is totally deficient there. And so we have, I have so to say, digitalized these modalities which as such are analogous. They are based on continuous processes. But here I digitalize them with these 5 digital values. And so at the end, I get this diagram, which is a very formalized grammar of the semantic content of Chopin D minor ballad. I should now sit at piano and play the piece and show you exactly what I mean in music, what is will in music, vouloir. Music wants to go to some direction. Or what is know, there is some information in music. There is entropy, redundancy. There is can, there is this technical properties like virtuosity sometimes. And there is devoir, there are normative rules like genre, form, anything which is normative. So in fact, it's rather easy to discover them. So this is, I put this to you because this was my most formalized and maybe most far brought study using the Paris School of Semiotics in musical field. Okay, now this Parisian phase in my life lasted rather long, but I have never totally given up Greimas. So when I started my next phase, the third one, which is this existential semiotics, which I come now, I remained somehow faithful to Greimas. So the Greimas school thought I'm now a traitor. I just left them, but it's not true because I'm still using my analysis nowadays like modalities and isotopies, which I think they are very productive and I can insert them into my new theory of which I call existential semiotics. My new theory, can you put the next, Magazeta? This is my cover of my first book, which appeared in 2000 at Indiana University Press, Existential Semiotics. That was my first study, published by Thomas A. Sibio. By the way, I must be very grateful because Greimas was absolutely against Paris School. He disliked everything French deeply. He couldn't stand. And I think I was the only person in the world from Greimas School whom he accepted. So that in his office in Bloomington, he had a fax machine at the time. There were 2 buttons, one for Umberto Eco and the other to me. I understand that. So anyway, this appeared in Bloomington. I remember the University Press's director, John Goldman, when I brought this book to him, he asked me, what do you mean by this existential after all? Well, I think he was American. Probably he thought it was something like Henry Thoreau, you know, by this writer in his Walden, something like that, or like the transcendentalists of the American philosophers. So Ralph Waldo Emerson and all these others, as you know. So I think he's also, and of course Emerson is great. That down. Okay, Bruce, put the next one, Magazeta. Okay, this was my first model, which I presented, which may be all too familiar to some of you. You see already great difference in the diagram compared to Greimas. Greimas is always the squares, Cartesian, categorical, square, definitely. But here, everything is in circles, and there are arrows. So this is more dynamic, so to say, and much more moving in time, much more processual, as I would say. So that was my whole approach, that I thought that semiotics must not be must become more processual, more with temporality. I thought. You see here circles in the left. You see the Dasein. That is the world in which our subject is living with objects. Dasein. I always use this German term Dasein, even in my English texts. By the way, here it is. It should be put in italics because it is alien word in English. I'm sorry, it is a mistake. It should be italics, Dasein. It's German. But I never translate. Of course, you can translate if you like. It's being there, or in French, l'être là, or essere ci in Italian. So, but I think it must be Dasein, because then it has all these German connotations which stem from the sein, to be, sein, das Seiende, Dasein, etc. It's enormous what they make in German language. So, subject lives in Dasein, but then he leaves it. He makes, I say, the journey by the acts of negation and affirmation, or as I now say, they are transcendental acts. So this concept of transcendence enters my model in this phase. Transcendence, which does not exist in semiotics in any way, I think, before. Transcendence exists, of course, mostly in German linked sociology like Alfred Schütz and Thomas Luckmann and Berger. In their understanding, Verstehende Sociology, we speak about transcendence of three transcendences, namely great, middle, small. Great transcendence is that we go, let's say, very far, let's say, to ancient Rome or antiquities. That's transcendence. Second one, the middle one, would be we live in a certain society in which maybe the other people altogether, they are transcendental. And then minor one, we meet other people, like I see now your face is there. You are to me transcendental entities, unfortunately, because I have no idea who you are, and I have no idea what you think there. I can only well, reason that perhaps it's something similar than in my head, something like Leibniz Strom, like Husserl puts it. So the stream of consciousness. I hope so. Anyway, in this model, our subject leaves the Dasein, and first by negation. He denies. So he encounters what I call le néant. That is from Jean-Paul Sartre already. Nothingness, le néant. Then he may return back to Dasein, and now Dasein has changed. It may be physically the same word, place, physically, but it has changed its meaning after this appearance. Well, one example I took from Italian literature by Cesare Pavese, a novel where the Italian hero leaves his home village in Piemonte to America. Nothingness. So, and then he gets back to his Piemonte after this experience, and though he is the same person, the place is the same, but his mind has changed. So it's Dasein in quotation marks only. Now, if I will stop here, certainly my theory would be nothing else than existentialism, this famous philosophical movement. But it's not like that. So, of course, I'm inspired by existentialist writers. I'm inspired by German philosophy, like Hegel. I like Kant. Kant, of course, has transcendent already. These two species of transcendence already. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish, and then, of course, we go later to Martin Heidegger, and then to Karl Jaspers, to whom I'm perhaps more indebted than to Heidegger. Hannah Arendt, of course, this great philosopher who left for the United States, and then in France, of course, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who started this existentialist movement in Paris after the Second World War, and then Jean Wahl, Gabriel Marcel, and many other French philosophers in that time. So anyway, I'm inspired by what they wrote, but I don't remain there. But I have here another transcendental journey, namely affirmation, in which the universe is not nothingness, devoid of meanings, but it is full of meanings. So it is plenitude, or pleroma, like the Gnostic philosophers say. In music, I will play here the Alexander Scriabin, the Prometheus score. You know, that was pleroma to him. It was plenitude, full of meaning, universe, so forth. You know, so that is plenitude. And then when our subject returns back to the Dasein, it is X, because what he makes there is something unknown so far. If he's an artist and makes an artwork, it has a new style. It's something existential after this negation and affirmation before. But anyway, that was my first model of existential semiotics. Well, it's close to Emmanuel Levinas also, because in Levinas' model, you know, you always go towards the unknown, totality l'infini. So we go towards that. So it is that. Now, please, can you give me the next PowerPoint? I think time is running very quickly. No, okay, this is still Saussure, but I put it here. In fact, all semiotics, to my mind, is a transcendental activity. Namely, let's take that semiotics is like Umberto Eco says, communication plus signification. Well, here we have the famous communication act by Saussure. Mr. A says something to B, so he emits some signs, auditive signs, which reach Mr. B's ear, and then something happens in his brain, and then he answers. So that's a dialogue. And these two persons, they don't know each other, so they are transcendental entities to each other. So this is a transcendental act, in fact, filling this gap. And of course, this gap is filled by modalities or grebas, even before Mr. A says anything, he has expectations what will happen, modalities, he modalizes, and B again remodalizes. And signification, sign. What is sign is nothing but something which refers to something which is absent. Aliquid stat pro aliquo, scholastics said. So it's, and that aliquo is transcendental entity, which we don't know. So that the simplest definition for transcendence is, it is anything which is absent, but you can think about it and maybe speak about it. Now, please, next. Okay, time is running. I notice, I'm sorry. But here is category of being, which I study by Hegel, namely his an mir sein, für mich sein, being for itself, being itself. And so I've again 4 categories which correspond to the moralist of will, can, know, and must. And okay. I might be on my time already. I think I'll be on my time already, maybe.
No, you have.
Okay, if I say
yes.
Something, okay. So I put here behind 2 categories more, namely, if you put the next, namely, moi and soi. By the way, I saw in the poster of this lecture, Margot Zata, you put my face, which was not terrible looking, by the way, with reference to my memories that appeared in Finnish, you know, it's moi and soi, because, you know, in Finnish, I'm sorry, you know, in Finnish, moi is moi. Moi is, the young people say hello, they say moi. I cannot say that, it is vulgar. I'm a professor, I don't say moi. And then soi. Soi is sound, it sounds. So it is hello, it sounds in Finnish. But it is in French, in fact, it is moi and soi. Moi is simply, it is me. me as a ego, that's me. And soi is society, others, with other society. Where Sartre said, l'enfer sont les autres. Maybe not always like that, but in moi soi. And so I put these categories to these Hegelian cases of being, and then I get 4 cases which I call moi 1, moi 2, soi 1, which are the same as my primary body as a chaotic, I'm sorry, the A is missing, chaotic, kinetic. Me as a kinetic energy, as totally chaotic reality. And then moi as person, when this body becomes, it becomes an actor. It got an identity. It's a kind of stability via habit. If you are purse, you will say habit, let's say. Whereas on the other hand, the soi is soi 1 are the abstract norms and rules, values of a society. Let's say good, true, wrong, or right. And then how these values, they are embodied in social practices. And that movement continues. And then there is a movement with this letter out Z, which I call a Zemic model. This is Zemic model, Z plus emic. Emic is from Kenneth Pike, American linguist. It means the internal. Emic and ethic, you know. In ethnomusicology, you have emicist, ethicist, and so. Emic means that I'm now inside my mind. And at the end, this model is mind of human mind. So it is an ontological model. Of course, it's hypothesis. We can never know. We can correct, but it is ontological. If you are Levi-Strauss, you will say that moi, primary model is le sensible, and soi 1 is the l'intelligible. If you are Theodor Adorno, you say you have a composer is moi, and society is soi, and they are always in conflict with each other, as he thought so. And there are 2 movements, namely from body to values, and that is sublimation. Our body is sublimated, if you like, in a Freudian sense, into values. And on the other hand, our soi society is embodied gradually. So that's maybe very, very abstract philosophical, but this becomes semiotics. Can you put the next paper and remember what it is? Aha, okay. Okay. So I mean that this semic becomes sig semic, namely sign semic, when it is represented by signs, by music. So I distinguish in music this body, musical body, musical actors. Musical body is the sound, klang, or rhythm. Musical actor is just melody, theme. Practice is certainly form, sonata, fugue, symphony, concerto, and then value is the aesthetics, let's say impressionism, romanticism, mysticism, whatsoever. And this process, the semic process, is almost organically going all the time. But now comes the existential moment. We can stop it anytime by transcending it. We can stop it. And we can go to empirical transcendence, which is nothing else than soi 1, which are the abstract norms there. But then we can continue to the level which I call suprasemic, which is just the existential level in which we are reflecting what happens. And so we discover the Hegelian das Wesen, the essence of things. And then we can go still further away. We can go to what we call a radical transcendence, and that is something a priori of which we cannot say anything but metaphors. So, and now you may have 2 epistemological choices. Either the real thing is down where we live here, and transcendence is nothing but our mental construction, our cognitive issue, whereby we try to explain the world which is so incomplete that there must be something more complete in transcendence. So it's not like Sartre says, Jean-Paul Sartre. Or you take the choice, like in theology, that in the radical transcendence is the only real thing, like let's say Thomas Aquinas, who says that the world design would stop existing immediately if this transcendence would not intervene and keeping it all the time by its grace, so to say. I must say that I never anything theological in my mind, but I know that now there have been essays here in Finland by Lutheran theology that my model in fact is theology. No, okay, it be. They can think so, but you have this radical and empirical. Now I would say if you are in literary studies and illustration, let's say Goethe, Johann Wolfgang Goethe, Faust, number 2. You see what happens in the end. Angels are carrying the Faust immortal, so, and then they sing. And the last phrase is a very, very famous, it's all the school children know by heart, is there. Und alles Vergängliche ist nur ein Gleichnis. Alles Vergängliche ist nur ein Gleichnis. All that vanishes is only a metaphor. It means that anything we have in this dozen world is only metaphor of this transcendence, to say. Because it's only by metaphors we can speak about this transcendence. Getting back to music, by the way, Roland Barthes, who wrote also about music, said that seule la métaphore est exacte about music. Seule la métaphore est exacte. Only metaphor is exact about music. It's interesting paradox to be said so. I still have something. Can I put the PowerPoint? Okay, here I applied more. You know, this is the well-known model by Lotman and others, this symbol semantics, syntax, and phonetics, which are the levels of the linguistic text, but which we can apply to all kinds of science, not only the linguistic one, but also to music. So we have these levels. And then I apply it here to my Zemi model, so that you see what is phonetics is here MOA1, body, cora, kinetic energy. What is the practice? What are the what are the MOA2 is identity, person, actors, and MOA3. So and they can also be made like a pyramid. So the levels. Can I put the next one? This is application to one piece, because I studied already some musical pieces in my book or Semiotics of Classical Music, which I. I study Mozart D minor fantasy and Schumann C major fantasy, and this is the diagram of what happens in C major fantasy of Schumann. It happens what I call the clash of these levels, because you know the subtitle of this piece by this wonderful piece is Ruins. What is ruin there? Sonata form, simply. So because there is no real recapitulation. So it means that there is the clash between the Sua 2 and Sua 2. Sua 2 would be the sonata form, and then the themes, actors, they exploded, so to say. And there are also other types of. So that's something which you can. But now, right now, I'm writing a study on Richard Wagner, and there I apply this more widely. And there are also some new essays by Springer, anthropology. I stopped just now, but in this, let's say, there are many in this by Paulo Chagas. Phenomenology and practice. There was one study. It was I tried to find a good notation for my ideas, something which would be like Schenker in his field, but now applied to the existential semiotics. Can you put the next? This is still Schumann fantasy. Here is the linear course of there are syncopes and okay, but I have no time to explain. I'm sorry. Please give the next one. Now this is here are my two books, which are rather recent. This is the Design and Shine, which was Malgorzata mentioned already, by Mouton de Gruyter, and then the other one is, can you put the next one? Yes. Semiotics of Classical Music, how Mozart, Brahms, and Wagner talk to us. So that's about music, and you can really, here I apply already my existential theory to music more concretely. But I think now I'm taking absolutely too much time. I'm sorry. You must be tired already. So I had still one article, but we had no time to show it because time is so much. And so thank you very much for your very kind attention. If you have anything to ask me still, I'm here now. So thank you so much.